The rejection ceremony was supposed to destroy her. That was how it worked. The alpha spoke the words, the bond fractured, and the rejected wolf collapsed, weeping, begging, clawing at his boots if the pain grew bad enough. Everyone in Asheville Pack knew the script. They had watched it happen 3 times before. The great hall would fill with witnesses, the alpha would speak, and the rejected wolf would shatter like glass on stone. Lena Ashford did not shatter. She stood at the center of the great hall in her ceremonial white 500 wolves watching from the tiered gallery above, and she listened to Kane Holloway, her mate, her alpha, the man she had loved since she was 16 years old, tell her she was not enough, that she had never been enough, that he had chosen Vera Sinclair, daughter of the Northern Ridge Pack, because the alliance was worth more than a bond the moon goddess had made by mistake. The hall waited for her to break. She lifted her chin instead. "I accept your rejection," she said, quietly. "The way you close a door on a room you will never enter again." The silence that followed was not the silence of pity. It was the silence of 500 wolves, realizing that the most dangerous person in that hall was the one walking away. Nobody noticed the stranger standing at the back of the room. Nobody except her. Chapter 1. The Wound. The ceremonial white had been her mother's idea, not the dress itself, that had been commissioned 8 months ago from the seamstress in the lower water, ivory silk with silver thread at the cuffs, the kind of garment you wore once, and kept folded in tissue paper until your daughter needed it. The idea of white had been her mother's. Wear something that shows them you are not afraid. Her mother had pressed both hands to Lena's face once the morning of the ceremony, and looked at her the way Partingas look at her mothers look at daughters when they are trying to memorize them. Whatever happens in that hall today, you walk out of it with your head up. Do you understand me? Lena had understood. She had not understood that it would need to be this hard. The great hall of Asheville Pack sat at the center of the pack house compound, a vaulted stone space that had been built 300 years ago for exactly these kinds of moments. Bonding ceremonies, rejection rites, war councils, territorial claims. The ceiling rose 40 feet above the floor. The gallery that ran around 3 walls of the room could hold 600. Today it held 512. Lena had not counted them herself. She had simply looked up once, when she first entered, and felt the weight of that many gazes pressed down on her like a physical thing. She had not looked up again. Kane stood at the ceremonial dais. He wore black, which she noticed distantly might small irrelevant details when the large ones are too enormous to process. His dark hair was swept back. He looked exactly as he always looked. Sharp-jawed, broad-shouldered, the kind of man a room organized itself around without being asked. He had looked at her when she entered. She had looked back at him and felt, for the last time, the warmth of the mate bond pull at her chest like a tide going out. She had walked to her mark on the floor and stood there, waiting. The pack elder had spoken first. Formalities. The ancient words of the bonding rite, delivered in the old tongue, then translated for the assembled witnesses. The bond that had been recognized, the terms that were now being invoked to dissolve it. Pack law, territorial law, the rights of an alpha to choose a political alliance over a fated bond if the strategic need was sufficient. Then Kane had spoken. She would remember the specific words for the rest of her life, not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they were delivered without cruelty. That was the worst part. He did not hate her. He was simply choosing something else. The way you choose a coat for a cold day without hating the coat you leave behind. The bond between myself and Lena Ashford is hereby dissolved by my will and in accordance with pack law. His voice was steady. His eyes were on the elder, not on her. She is exactly what the moon goddess gives you when she has run out of better options. I require more than the goddess's afterthought. I require a Luna who can secure our borders, not a woman who cannot even secure her alpha's loyalty. The gallery went very quiet. Not the quiet of sympathy. The quiet of witnesses, registering something that would be repeated, whispered, dissected at dinner tables, across the territory for the next decade. Lena felt the bond fracture. It was not like she had imagined it would be. In the years she had spent quietly dreading this possibility, she had imagined it as a tearing. Something violent, something that would knock the breath from her. Instead, it felt like a key turning in a lock, a mechanism releasing, a door swinging open onto cold air. The cold air was the worst part. Her hands were at her sides. She pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger. A small private pain that gave her something to focus on, that was not the 500 faces above her, or the mate bond, dissolving like salt in water. The silver thread at her cuffs caught the light. She thought of her mother's hands on her face. Whatever happens in that hall today, you walk out of it with your head up. She looked at Kane Holloway for the last time. His gaze had finally moved to her face. There was something in it she had not expected. Not regret, exactly, but a kind of blankness, the expression of a man who has committed to a decision and is now waiting for the consequences to arrive so he can process them and move on. He was already thinking about the next thing. She could see it. She had always been able to read him, which meant she had also always been able to see exactly how far down his list of priorities she sat. She had spent 4 years not letting herself see that clearly. She saw it now. "I accept your rejection," she said. The words came out quiet, not trembling, not performing composure. She had nothing left to perform. She was simply, genuinely, on the other side of something she had been dreading for years, and the relief of having it finally be real was almost indistinguishable from grief. The hall waited. She turned and walked toward the door. The 500 wolves in the gallery were so silent, she could hear her own footsteps on the stone floor. She did not count them. She did not look up. She walked the way her mother had taught her to walk. Spine straight, chin level, eyes forward. Not proud, not performing pride. Simply choosing to take up the space she occupied rather than making herself smaller for anyone's comfort. She was 12 steps from the door when she felt it. A gaze, not one of the 500 above her. Something different. Something that landed on the back of her neck with a specific, focused weight, the way a hand lands rather than a crowd. She did not turn her head. She kept walking, but her peripheral vision caught, in the shadows beside the great door, the outline of a man she did not recognize. Tall, still, watching. She pushed through the door into the cold air of the corridor, and the door swung shut behind her, and she stood in the silence of the empty passageway and pressed her back against the stone wall and finally let herself breathe. She did not cry. She had promised herself that much. Not here. Not where any of them could hear it. She pressed her thumbnail into her index finger one more time, felt the small, clean bite of it, and straightened up. She had nowhere to go. Her rooms were inside the pack house compound. Her belongings were behind doors that belonged to a pack. She was no longer a member of her life as she had constructed. It was in pieces on the floor of that hall. She had nothing. She walked to the end of the corridor, pushed open the small door at the end of it, and stepped out into the cold night air of the courtyard. The moon was full above Ashvale territory, enormous and indifferent. She looked up at it and felt, for the first time in 4 years, entirely free. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Offer. She had been standing in the courtyard for perhaps 4 minutes when she heard the door behind her open. She did not turn around. She assumed it was one of her mother's people, or perhaps one of the pack elders coming to walk her through the administrative formalities of a dissolved bond, the paperwork, the territorial boundaries she was now legally excluded from, the quiet bureaucracy of being unmated. She had enough composure left to handle that, she thought. "You are not what I expected." The voice was not her mother. It was not a pack elder. It was the voice of a man she had not heard before. Low, unhurried, the kind of voice that did not raise itself, because it had never needed to. She turned. The man from the doorway. Up close he was, different. Taller than she had registered. Somewhere in his early 30s, dark-haired, with the kind of face that had been built for control rather than expression. He wore traveling clothes, not ceremonial dress, which meant he had not been here as a guest. He had been here as an observer. The distinction mattered, and she could not yet determine why. "What did you expect?" she said. "Tears. Possibly a scene." He looked at her the way people look at things that have surprised them, not rudely, but with the attentiveness of someone recalibrating. "Every rejection ceremony I have attended, the rejected wolf provides the crowd with something to carry home. You denied them that entirely." "I wasn't performing for them." "No," he said. "You weren't." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My name is Aldrich Voss." The name landed. She was proud afterward of how little she showed in that moment, because Aldrich Voss was not a name that required context in the wolf world. There was no pack in any territory, not Northern Ridge, not Ashvale, not the Eastern Coalitions or the Western Sea Clans, that did not know exactly who Aldrich Voss was. The Lycan King, the oldest bloodline in the known wolf world. The man whose territory encompassed 3 times the landmass of any pack alpha, whose court at Blackthorn had not received a visiting delegation in 11 years, because he had not needed anything from anyone in 11 years. The man about whom the only thing every wolf in every pack agreed on was that you did not want to be in a room with him when he had decided something. He was standing in the courtyard of Ashvale Pack at midnight in traveling clothes, watching her. "I know who you are," she said. Her voice was level. She was extremely pleased with it. "Then you understand that when I make a proposal, I have considered it carefully." She turned fully to face him. "You came to a rejection ceremony to make me a proposal. I came to observe a diplomatic meeting between Ashvale and Northern Ridge." The faintest suggestion of something moved across his expression, not quite disdain, but close. The rejection ceremony was an unexpected addition to the schedule, as was you. He paused. "I have a political situation that requires a specific solution. You have a situation that requires, at minimum, somewhere to go tonight that is not inside that building." He tilted his head toward the pack house. "I am proposing that we solve each other's problems." The cold air moved between them. "Tell me the proposal," she said. "The Lycan Summit convenes in 3 weeks at Blackthorn Court. 12 pack representatives, 4 territorial governors, and 2 foreign delegations, all of whom have spent the last year watching my court and drawing conclusions about stability based on the fact that I have no queen consort." His tone was entirely matter-of-fact. "I need those conclusions corrected before the summit begins. I need a woman at my side who is politically credible, personally composed, and sufficiently memorable that the delegations take her seriously." He looked at her. "You have demonstrated composure under conditions that would have broken most wolves I know. You are the daughter of Ashvale's former head elder, which gives you political standing regardless of your current status. And you are sufficiently memorable." Lena was quiet for a moment. For how long? One political season, the summit and its aftermath, perhaps 6 weeks in total. And in exchange? Something shifted in his expression, barely. Kane Holloway's alliance with Northern Ridge depends on 3 territorial signatures. I hold 2 of them by proxy through agreements older than your pack's founding. If I decline to transfer those signatures to the new alliance structure, the agreement collapses. Holloway does not get his Luna. Northern Ridge does not get its border access. The alliance fails before it is ever signed. The courtyard was very quiet. Lena looked at the moon for a moment, then back at him. "I have conditions," she said. "I assumed you would. I will share your public life. Formal appearances, the summit, whatever diplomatic theater is required. I will not share your private life. My rooms are my own. My time outside of official engagements is my own. You do not explain my history to your court. If anyone asks, I am a political appointment and nothing further." She paused. "And if at any point I determine that the arrangement is being used against my interests rather than for them, I walk. No negotiation." He considered her for precisely 3 seconds. "Agreed," he said. No hesitation. No counteroffer. No attempt to revise her terms or soften them or redirect them toward something more convenient for him. He simply agreed, the way a man agrees when the terms are reasonable and he has no interest in being unreasonable. It was so different from every negotiation she had ever had with Kane Holloway that she almost didn't know what to do with it. "When do we leave?" she said. "Tonight. I have a vehicle at the northern gate." He turned to go, then stopped. Not turning back, just pausing. "You will need warmer clothes than that. The road north is cold." He walked back toward the packhouse door. She watched him go. She had not asked him how he knew her name. She had registered, in the moment, that he had used it when he had not been introduced to her. She filed the detail away carefully. The man already knew her name. She looked up at the moon one more time. Then she went to find warmer clothes. Chapter 3. The Performance. Blackthorn Court was older than any building she had ever been inside. Not old in the way packhouses were old, drafty and worn and carrying the specific smell of generations of wolves in enclosed spaces. Old in the way mountains were old. The stone of the main hall was black granite shot through with threads of silver that caught the light differently at different hours of the day, so that the walls seemed almost to breathe. The ceilings were vaulted. The corridors were wide enough to drive 2 vehicles through side by side, and every surface that could bear a carving had been carved. Pack sigils, lunar cycles, territorial maps rendered in bas relief that would take weeks to read properly. Her rooms were on the eastern wing, 3rd floor, overlooking a courtyard, where a single enormous oak tree grew at the center, with roots that had cracked the cobblestones in 4 directions over what must have been centuries. The rooms themselves were larger than the entire upper floor of her mother's house. She stood in the middle of them on the first morning and thought, distantly, that she had agreed to this arrangement with a man she had known for 11 minutes. The thought did not frighten her. She noticed that and stored it. The performance began 4 days after her arrival, when the first of the pre-summit delegations came to Blackthorn Court. She had been briefed by Aldrich's chief advisor, a compact, gray-haired woman named Soren, who delivered information with the efficient warmth of someone who had seen a great many things and retained the capacity to be neither impressed nor alarmed by them. The delegation from the Eastern Coast Coalition, 3 representatives and their attachés, expected to be received formally. They expected to meet the Lycan King. They had not been told to expect a queen consort, which meant Lena's presence would be a statement in itself, and the statement needed to land precisely. Stand to his left, Sortran had told her, not behind him, not half a step back, level. If they address you directly, answer directly. Do not look to him for permission. If they ignore you, do not fill the silence. Let the silence do the work. Lena had nodded. She already knew how to do most of this. She had grown up in a pack elder's household. She knew how rooms worked. What she had not anticipated was Aldrich himself. She had constructed, in the 4 days since arriving at Blackthorn, a working model of the man. Controlled. Economical. A person who spent no more energy on any interaction than the interaction strictly required. She had expected the performance to be exactly that. A performance, bracketed and defined, 2 people executing an agreed arrangement with professional competence. He surprised her. Hike, in the formal reception room, standing by beside her while the Eastern Coast delegation assessed them both, Mike inclined to timing funked the man. He inclined his head toward her and said very quietly, "The one on the left has been trying and who had waited for precisely the right moment. Kali enemy trying to calculate your territorial value since you entered the Farculate Predator Tune, marks a room year and he has been unsuccessful, which is frustrating him. You might consider giving him something to calculate." She had not looked at him. She had looked at the man he indicated and seen, with a clarity she might have missed without the direction, the specific quality of the delegate's attention. The assessment, the frustrated arithmetic. She had smiled at the delegate, not warmly, precisely. The smile of a woman who knows exactly how the room works. The delegate had straightened slightly and stopped calculating. Afterward, walking the corridor back toward the main wing, she had said, "You are better at reading rooms than I expected. You expected me to be poor at it? I expected you to not bother." Something crossed his expression that she was beginning to recognize as the version of amusement he allowed himself. Not quite a smile. More a slight easing around the eyes. Reading rooms is the most important skill in diplomacy. Every room tells you who wants what and how badly. The information is free. It costs only attention. Kane used to say that reading rooms was a servant's skill. She had not meant to say that. It came out before she had finished deciding whether to say it, which was unlike her. Aldrich did not respond immediately. They walked 4 more steps before he said, "That explains several things about Kane Holloway's diplomatic record." She had pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. She was surprised by the impulse. She had not expected to laugh at anything for quite some time. The weeks developed a rhythm. Formal appearances in the morning, briefings with Soren in the afternoon. Evenings that were technically her own, but that increasingly became the time she looked forward to for reasons she was not examining closely. Aldrich moved through his own court with the specific gravity of a man who had never needed to announce himself. Nounsker's rooms quieted when he entered, not out of fear exactly, but out of the instinctive readjustment of a space acknowledging its center of gravity. She watched him. She filed things away. She was very careful not to examine what she was filing or why. 11 days into the arrangement, Kane Holloway arrived at Blackthorn Court. He came as part of the Northern Ridge delegation, a last-minute addition to the pre-summit diplomatic circuit that Soren to Lena with the controlled neutrality of someone who expected the information to cause disruption and was prepared to manage it. Lena had received the information with equal neutrality and then sat alone in her room for 20 minutes, processing it before she felt ready to be seen by anyone. She had dressed carefully that morning, not in the ivory of the rejection ceremony. That dress was at the bottom of a trunk and she had not touched it. She wore deep blue, the color of Blackthorn Court's formal palette, which meant she was wearing his colors without the declaration being explicit enough to be gauche. Soren had noted it with the expression of someone approving a well-executed tactical decision. The reception for the Northern Ridge Set delegation was held in the Great Hall. Lena stood at Aldrich's left, level, exactly where she was supposed to stand. She watched the delegation enter. She watched Kane see her. The expression on his face was worth every cold mile of the road north from Ashvale. He had not expected this. That was clear in the precise moment before his composure reassembled itself. A fractional widening of the eyes, a stiffening of the jaw, the recalculation happening visibly behind his face before the mask came back down. He had expected her to be somewhere diminished, somewhere lesser. He had rejected her in front of 500 witnesses and walked away assuming she would contract, would grieve, would find some smaller life and occupy it quietly. He had not imagined this particular countermove. Aldrich, standing beside her, said nothing. He simply received the delegation with the complete, unhurried composure of a man who had arranged in sin things precisely as he intended them to be, and found no cause for comment in Nate intended in the outcome. Lena kept her face pleasant and unreadable. When Kane was formally introduced to her in the reception line, he said her name with a cadence she recognized. The cadence of a man who wanted to have a private conversation and was furious that he could not. She inclined her head at him with the same pleasant precision she had been deploying on every delegate for 11 days. "Lena," he said. "Alpha Holloway," she said, and moved on to the next person in line. Chapter 4. Cracks in the Armor. It was a blade meant for Aldrich. She knew that in the first second, when the man came out of the tree line during the formal hunt on the third day of the Northern Ridge delegation's visit, knew it from the angle of approach, the target of the movement, the fact that Aldrich was 3 steps ahead of her on the forest path, and the man was moving toward him with the specific, committed velocity of someone who had made a decision long before this moment. She did not think, she moved. It was not heroism. It was simple geometry. She was closer to the man's path than any of the guards, who were positioned wider in the formal hunt formation. And the calculation happened in her body rather than her mind. She stepped into the gap. The blade caught her across the outer left arm, below the shoulder. A long cut, deeper than a graze, not deep enough to reach the bone. It burned immediately. The specific sharp heat of it clarifying everything around her into very clean, high-contrast detail. The guards had the man in 3 seconds. The hunt dissolved into controlled chaos. Aldrich turned. She remembered the expression on his face very precisely. She had seen him surprised only once before, the night in the courtyard when she had told him she had conditions. and he had found them reasonable. That had been a small surprise. The recalibration of a man encountering something slightly different from his prediction. This was different. This was his composure leaving his face entirely, for exactly 2 seconds before it returned. He closed the distance between them and took her arm in both his hands, turning it to see the wound and the careful, the wound the torda radatir. Focused quality of his attention was so different from everything that surrounded them. The shouting guards, the restless horses, the sound of Kane Holloway's voice somewhere to the left, demanding to know what had happened. That she found herself anchored to it the way you anchor to a fixed point when everything else is moving. It is not serious, she said. I can see what it is, he said. He would not let the healer treat it alone. She discovered this in the infirmary. When he dismissed the second healer who arrived and cleaned the wound himself with the focused, unhurried competence of a man who had been doing practical things with his hands for a very long time. She watched him work and did not say anything, and felt the specific quality of the silence between them change. Become something denser, more considered. You should have let the guard handle it, he said. The guard was not positioned correctly. No. He tied off the bandage. His hands were still on her arm. He was not. He did not move them immediately. That was my failure, not yours. She looked at his hands on her arm. The warmth of them was a specific, detailed thing that she was very carefully not examining. You could not have anticipated a breach in the formal hunt formation. I anticipate everything, he said. That is my entire function. She looked up at him. He was close. Closer than he usually stood, the physical proximity of the task having collapsed the careful distance they both maintained in every shared space. She could see, from here, the quality of the tension in his jaw. The control that was always there, but was working harder tonight. Why did you really come to Asheville that night? She said. The question surprised him. She could see that. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. I told you. The diplomatic meeting. You could have sent a representative. Lycan Kings do not attend Asheville diplomatic meetings in person. She kept her voice level. You came for something specific. Another silence. Longer. Go to sleep, he said. He released her arm. He stood. The wound will be stiff by morning. Do not favor it, or it will heal crooked. He was at the door before she said, I am not as unbroken as I appear. He stopped. She had not planned to say it. It came from the same place the comment about Kane had come from, 2 weeks ago in the corridor. From somewhere beneath the composure, the place she kept carefully sealed and had apparently been less careful about lately. I walk correctly and I speak correctly, and I do not cry in front of people, she continued. But I want you to know, I am not telling you this because I need you to see it. I am telling you because you have been extremely careful to treat me as if I am not breakable. And I think you deserve to know that you are not wrong to be careful. She was looking at the bandage on her arm. When she looked up, he was facing her. He had turned back from the door. The expression on his face was not the controlled near blankness of his public composure. It was something quieter, something that had weight to it. I know, he said, simply. The way you say something that has been true for a long time. Then he left. She sat in the infirmary, in the quiet, and pressed her right hand over the bandage on her left arm and looked at the ceiling and did not examine anything at all for quite a long time. In the dark, some time later, she woke from a shallow sleep to find that someone had placed a wool blanket over her. She had not heard him leave it. She lay in the dark with the warmth of it around her shoulders, and listened to the silence of Blackthorn Court at night, and felt, for the first time, the great hall in Ashvale, something she did not immediately have a name for. By morning, she had convinced herself it was gratitude. She was almost sure that was right. Chapter 5. The Complication. She was not supposed to be in the East Corridor at that hour. She had been restless 3 nights after the hunt. The arm was healing cleanly. Soren had confirmed the attacker was an isolated agent with no pack affiliation. The summit was 4 days away, and the Blackthorn Court machinery was running at full capacity, and she had found herself too alert to sleep. Walking corridors, she did not usually walk at an hour when most of the court had retired. She heard Aldrich's voice before she saw the door. Not his voice raised. He never raised his voice. But the East Corridor carried sound in a particular way, the stone channeling it, and she caught the shape of the words before she caught their meaning. She slowed. She was not eavesdropping. She was simply present in a corridor, in the dark, and his voice was there. The chief advisor, Soren, and Aldrich, has been asking questions about the arrangement, Soren was saying. The Northern Ridge delegation, specifically Holloway, has been suggesting to other delegates that the Queen Consort position is. Let them suggest, Aldrich said. The concern is not what they suggest. The concern is why you structured the arrangement this way. If the summit delegates conclude it is a political maneuver rather than a genuine. It was engineered, Aldrich said, flatly, clearly. The entire arrangement was engineered. Lena stopped. The timing, the approach, the specific terms, none of it was accidental. You know that. A pause. The question the delegates will ask is whether it was engineered for the summit specifically, or whether there was a prior. The arrangement served the summit's purposes, Aldrich said. That is what the delegates need to understand. She did not hear the rest of the sentence. She was already moving. The cold that moved through her chest was the specific cold of a door reopening. The one she had shut in the great hall in Ashvale, the one she had walked through and believed she had sealed behind her. The cold of being again a piece on a board. A calculated resource. The thing the moon goddess gives you when she has run out of better options. She had known it was an arrangement. She had agreed to it as an arrangement. She had told herself every morning for 3 weeks that she was not confusing the arrangement for something else, that she was too careful and too sensible and too thoroughly educated by Kane Holloway's methodology to make that mistake again. She had made the mistake again. She walked back to her rooms in the East Wing and stood in the middle of them, in the dark, and looked at nothing for a long time. The engineered arrangement, the specific terms, none of it accidental. She thought of the courtyard in Ashvale, his timing, the way he had already known her name. She thought of the blanket in the infirmary. She thought of his hands on her arm. She thought of him turning back from the door in the dark to look at her with something that had weight to it. She had read it as real. She was very good at reading things. And she had read it as real, and she had been wrong. She pulled her trunk out from the bottom of the wardrobe. The ivory dress was there, folded in tissue paper, exactly where she had put it. She did not touch it. She put her hands flat on the lid of the trunk and pressed and breathed and looked at the floor and felt, with total clarity, exactly how foolish she had been. She began, with great composure, to pack. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. She had timed it for early morning. Not because she was running. She was not running. She was withdrawing, which was a different thing, a thing she had the right to do, a thing she had explicitly reserved the right to do in her conditions on the night in the courtyard when she had made the agreement. If at any point I determine that the arrangement is being used against my interests rather than for them, I walk. She dressed carefully. She packed only what she had arrived with. The warmer clothes suits she had gathered from Ash Vale the night of the rejection. The few personal items she had brought in the vehicle. She left everything Blackthorn Court had provided. She did not want any of it. She found Aldrich in his study. She had expected to have to wait. He was already there, at his desk, in the early gray light of a summit week morning, working. He looked up when she came in. She had prepared the speech in the sleepless hours before dawn. She delivered it exactly as prepared. "I want to release you from the arrangement," she said. "The summit is 4 days away, and there is still time to manage the transition narratively. Soren can construct a reason, something diplomatic and clean. I will leave this morning, and I will not speak publicly about my time here, and your court's position at the summit will not be damaged." She paused. "I am not doing this as a punishment. I do not want anything from you. I understand that the arrangement was constructed for the summit's purposes and that every element of it was engineered, and that is completely within your rights. It was a transactional agreement, and you used it transactionally, and there is nothing wrong with that." She kept her voice level. She was proud of it. "I simply think it is better for both of us if I go." She had made a mistake somewhere in the middle of the speech. She was aware of it. She had said "I," simply, which was a tell. Her mother had always said that when Lena said "I," simply she was compressing something much larger into a much smaller space. She hoped he had not noticed. He had noticed. She could see that in the way he was looking at her, with that specific, focused attention he brought to things that required him to process them carefully. "Lena," he said, "you do not need to. You did not hear the whole sentence." She stopped. He stood. He came around the desk, and she took one step back without meaning to, and he stopped where he was. Not advancing, not retreating. Simply present in the middle of the room at a distance that was close enough to make everything she had prepared feel suddenly insufficient. "What I said to Soren," his voice was low, even. "You heard, I know what you heard. You heard that the arrangement was engineered. You heard that the terms were not accidental." He paused. "You did not stay for the next part of the sentence." She looked at him. "You did not stay," he said, "to hear Soren ask me how long." The study was very quiet. Outside, the first pale light of morning was moving through the courtyard windows, finding the roots of the oak tree, illuminating the cracked cobblestones. She did not move. She did not speak. She was waiting for the next thing with all of the composure she had left, which was not very much. He crossed the room in 4 steps and closed his hand around her wrist. Not hard, just certain, the grip of a man who has made a decision, and she did not pull away. "Sit down," he said. "Please." She sat. He stood in front of her, and for the first time in the weeks she had been at Blackthorn Court, she saw his composure as what it actually was. Not the absence of feeling, but the housing of it, the thing built to contain something that needed containing. "Let me tell you the whole sentence," he said. Chapter 7. The Truth Confession. He did not sit. He stood at the window, facing the courtyard, hands clasped behind his back, and he spoke to the glass rather than to her, for the first part of it, which she understood. Some things were easier to say sideways. "Soren asked me how long the arrangement had been engineered," he said. "Specifically, she asked me why I had waited 7 years to act on it." The number landed. Lena felt it in the specific way you feel something that rearranges the furniture of your understanding. Quietly, with a kind of interior thud, all the pieces moving to different positions. 7 years, she repeated. The Asheville Midsummer Territorial Gathering. 7 years ago. He was still facing the window. You were there with Holloway. You were. He paused, not struggling exactly. Choosing. You were arguing with him about something small. I never knew what it was. But you were arguing, and then you stopped arguing, and you simply stood very still for a moment and looked at him, and then you turned and walked in a different direction. A pause. The way you moved. The decision you made in that moment to stop and turn rather than to push. There was something in it that I had not seen before. He was quiet for a moment. I did not speak to you. You were bonded. He was your alpha. The situation was not one I was going to insert myself into. Lena was very still. I attended 4 more territorial events where Asheville was present over the following years, he continued. I told myself each time that I was attending for diplomatic reasons, which was true. I was attending for other reasons as well, which I did not tell myself. You watched me for 7 years, she said. I was aware of you for 7 years. He turned from the window. His face, finally facing her, was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. Not exposed, exactly, but no longer managed. There is a difference. I did not surveil you. I did not intervene in your life. I simply knew where you were in a room. When you were in a room, I was also in. And when I heard what Holloway did in that hall, when I heard the specific words he used, what he said in front of 500 witnesses, something moved through his expression that she had not seen there before, something that had heat to it. I was already moving toward the door before I had finished processing it. She thought of the courtyard, the 11 minutes, the way he had agreed to her conditions without hesitation. You already knew what my conditions would be, she said slowly. Not specifically, but I knew enough about who you were to know that you would have them, and that they would be reasonable. He came toward her, not quickly, measuring the distance carefully. The arrangement was engineered, Lena. That part was true. I structured it as a transaction because it was the only door you would have walked through that night. You were not going to accept anything that looked like pity or charity or rescue. You needed it to make sense on your terms. He stopped in front of her. So I made it make sense on your terms. She looked up at him. The summit, she said. The territorial signatures. All of it. Was that real? All of it is real. No hesitation. The summit needs a queen consort. The signatures can collapse Holloway's alliance. Every practical element of the arrangement is entirely genuine. A pause. It is also true that I would have found a reason to make this offer regardless of the summit's schedule. The summit was convenient timing, not the cause of it. She was quiet for a long moment. She was thinking about 7 years. About a man who had watched her love someone who did not deserve her, and said nothing, because it was not his place. About the restraint required for that. The specific, exhausting restraint of a person who believes that other people's choices belong to them, even when those choices are wrong, even when watching those choices costs something. She thought about the blanket in the infirmary. She thought about his hands on her arm. She thought about the way he had turned back from the door to look at her and say, I know, simply, without decoration, as though it were a fact he had been holding for a very long time. She thought about the word engineered, said flatly in the dark of the East Corridor, and how she had turned and walked away from it before she heard the sentence finish. She thought about the specific education she had received from Kane Holloway over 4 years, the slow, thorough teaching that she was exactly what the moon goddess gives you when she has run out of better options. And that the evidence of this was everywhere, always, in the way he valued other things over her with such consistent and unhurried ease. She thought about how that teaching had moved into her bones, how she had packed it up and carried it to Blackthorn Court and unpacked it again. In the dark, the moment she had found something that seemed to confirm it, she thought about how little credit she had extended to herself. She stood. She was not tall enough to be level with him. He had a significant height advantage, which she had always registered, and which had never, she noted, made her feel smaller. She looked up at him, and she saw, clearly, a man who had been patient beyond what most people would have been patient for, and who had structured an entire offer around her dignity rather than his convenience, and who was standing in front of her now with his composure fully down, and his face completely open, waiting. "You should have said something 7 years ago," she said. "You were bonded. I know. I am saying you should have said something anyway." She paused. "Not to interfere, just so I knew." She paused again. "It would have been useful information." Something broke open in his expression. It was not quite a smile. It was more significant than a smile. The specific release of a tension that had been maintained for a very long time. His hand came up to her face, and she turned her cheek into his palm before she had made the decision to, and felt the warmth of it settle into her like something returning. "I am telling you now," he said. "Yes," she said. "You are." She reached up and closed her hand around his wrist, not to remove his hand, simply to hold it there, to make the gesture mutual, to be a person who was choosing rather than a person who was being chosen. That distinction mattered enormously to her. "I do not want to go back to Ashvale," she said. "You do not have to." "I am not staying because I have nowhere to go," she said. "I want that to be clear. I have options. I could go to my mother's house, or petition the Eastern Coalition for territorial status, or a dozen other things." She looked at him steadily. "I am choosing to stay because I want to be here. That is the only reason I am giving you." "It is the only reason I want," he said. She believed him. That was the part she had not expected. Not the warmth of his hand on her face, not the revelation of 7 years, not the careful architecture of an offer built around her dignity. The part she had not expected was how simple it felt to believe him, how unlike work it was, how much she had not realized until this moment, how much of her energy she had spent over 4 years on the exhausting, losing project of convincing herself that Kane Holloway's version of her was wrong. Aldrich Voss had never offered her an incorrect version of herself to argue against. She leaned her forehead against his chest. She felt his arms come around her, careful of the bandaged arm, and she stood in the quiet study in the early light of a summit morning and breathed, and did not perform anything, and did not monitor herself, and simply was. Outside in the courtyard, the oak tree's roots held their ancient grip on the cracked cobblestones. The moon had long since set. The sun was coming. Epilogue. 8 months later, the courtyard of Blackthorn Court on a morning in the long autumn, when the oak tree had turned, and the air carried the specific cold clarity that arrived every year at this time, and that Lena had, she realized, begun to think of as hers. She carried the trunk out herself. She had considered asking someone to carry it. There were a dozen people who would have done so without being asked. But it was not a heavy trunk, and it was hers, and she wanted to carry it herself. She set it down beside the iron fire basket of the courtyard, at the center of the courtyard, the one that was lit in the evenings for the court's outdoor gatherings, and she stood there for a moment with her hands on the lid. She opened it. The ivory dress was still folded in tissue paper. She had not touched it in 8 months. She had carried it from Ashvale to Blackthorn in a packed bag, and then transferred it to the trunk, and then put the trunk at the bottom of her wardrobe. And there it had stayed while her life at Blackthorn Court built itself around her with a steadiness she had not anticipated and had, in the early months, distrusted carefully. She had stopped distrusting it somewhere around month 3. She lifted the dress out of the tissue paper. It was still ivory, still silk, still carrying the silver thread at the cuffs that her mother had loved. It was exactly as she had last seen it. The garment she had worn when she had stood in the great hall in Asheville in front of 500 witnesses and said, "I accept your rejection," and walked out without breaking. She held it for a moment. Then she placed it in the fire basket and struck the light. The silk caught immediately, the ivory turning amber, and then black, the silver thread glowing briefly before it too went dark. The fire was quiet, no drama, no ceremony, just the clean, practical business of combustion. She stood and watched it go. She heard the courtyard door behind her. She did not turn around. She knew the specific sound of his footsteps on the cobblestones. She had been learning them for 8 months, and she knew he would come to stand beside her rather than Narking Hoon, because she already knew the way he generally knew, which was one of the things about him that she had entirely stopped finding unsettling. Minahindi he's holidin one heedy suptic sidewit. He came and stood beside her. They watched the fire together. "Soren had the confirmation from the Northern Ridge Council this morning," he said after a while. "Informational. Even. Holloway was formally stripped of his alpha title 6 weeks ago. The council vote was unanimous." "I heard," she said. "Soren told me." The Northern Ridge Alliance was dissolved before it was ever registered. Vera Sinclair returned to her father's territory in the 2nd month. A pause. "I thought you should know that it concluded." "I knew it would." She had known it from the night in the courtyard when he had laid out the mechanics with the calm certainty of a man describing things already in motion. It was never actually about the alliance. Kane wanted the upgrade. When the upgrade didn't arrive, there was nothing holding the arrangement together. "No," Aldrich said, "there wasn't." The name Kane Holloway had not been spoken in this courtyard in months. She did not find the speaking of it difficult. It had become, over the past 8 months, simply historical, a piece of context. The thing that had happened before everything else happened. The ash rose. She watched it drift upward into the cold autumn air, dispersing into nothing before it reached the height of the oak tree's canopy. There and then gone. Light. She thought about the great hall in Ashvale, about 500 faces, about the specific quality of the silence after she had said, "I accept your rejection." The silence that was not pity, the silence of a room, realizing that the most dangerous person present was the one walking away. She had been walking away from things her entire life that she should have been walking toward. She had walked away from that hall and found, entirely by accident, the right direction. She supposed there were worse navigational strategies. Aldrich's hand found hers. She looked down at their joined hands. His fingers between hers, the easy, unannounced quality of the gesture, the way it had stopped being remarkable and become simply true. She turned her palm upward and held his hand properly and felt the warmth of it settle, and looked up at the oak tree above them with its ancient roots and its cracked cobblestones and its autumn-turned leaves coming down one at a time in the still air. The trunk was empty. The ivory dress was ash. She was queen consort of the Lycan court. And the name Ashford had not been spoken in her presence in months. And her left arm had healed cleanly without favoring it, just as she had been told it would. And every morning she woke in Blackthorn Court, Mirren Lacant and Prite, and did not distrust the steadiness of it any more. She looked at the ash rising. She let it go. And that, wolf pack, is where we leave them. Standing in the ash of everything that tried to break her, holding on to the one thing that never asked her to be less than she was. If Lena's story hit you somewhere real, if you have ever stood in a room full of witnesses and refused to break, drop an emoji in the comments and tell me what chapter got you. I read every single one. Like this video if you want more stories about women who walk away without looking back. Subscribe to the Wolf Pack. New stories every week, and I will see you in the next one. We are just getting started.